The sound of a slap echoed across the weapons qualification range like a gunshot. 83 pairs of eyes turned toward the small woman who had just hit the concrete floor. Her cheek burned red, the handprint already forming. Her technician's cap tumbled away, rolling to a stop against an ammunition crate. Staff Sergeant Derek Vaughn stood over her, his hand still raised, palm open. 6 feet 2 inches of muscle and ego, wrapped in a ranger instructor's uniform. The morning sun caught the combat patch on his shoulder, the one he wore like a medal despite never having earned it in actual combat. His shadow fell across the woman at his feet like a judgment. "I asked you one last time." His voice carried across the training yard, designed to humiliate, designed to break. "Give me the weapon." Elena Blackwell, maintenance technician, oil-stained uniform, dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, slowly pushed herself up from the ground. She said nothing, just quietly picked up her cap, dusted it off with deliberate care, and placed it back on her head. Her movements were measured, controlled, carrying a precision that seemed almost mechanical. "Can't talk," Derek laughed, turning to the crowd of rangers watching the scene unfold. "See this? This is why women don't belong here. Can't even clean a rifle properly." Laughter rippled through the training yard. Not the full-throated kind, but the nervous laughter of young men desperate to belong, desperate to prove themselves by joining in the humiliation of someone smaller, weaker, someone who couldn't fight back. Elena remained silent, but something in her eyes made Master Sergeant Isaac Thornton, standing in the far corner, pause mid-step. He narrowed his gaze, studying the way she stood. Shoulders open, center of gravity low, hands relaxed at her sides but ready. That stance. He'd seen it before in places where even rangers weren't cleared to set foot. Colonel Nathan Pierce emerged from the command building, conducting his routine inspection. He stopped when he saw the scene before him. His weathered face, marked by 64 years of service and secrets, revealed nothing. But his eyes, those pale blue eyes that had witnessed operations the world would never know about, locked onto Elena with an intensity that spoke of recognition. "What's going on here?" His voice cut through the morning air with the authority of a man who'd commanded men in places that didn't exist on official maps. Derek spun around, his face still flushed with anger and something else, something darker. "Sir, this technician is refusing to release weapons to my unit. She's delaying our entire training schedule." Pierce looked at Elena, then at the M4 carbine in her hands, and for just a moment something flickered in his eyes. Knowledge. Understanding. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the neutral expression of a commanding officer dealing with a routine matter. "Handle it, Staff Sergeant." Derek grinned, the expression predatory. "Yes, sir." He stepped toward Elena, fists clenched. But in the next 20 minutes, everything he believed about himself, everything he thought he knew about strength and weakness, about warriors and civilians, would crumble to dust. The training yard at Joint Tactical Training Complex, Fort Bragg, North Carolina, buzzed with the controlled chaos of an inter-service combat readiness evaluation. Over 80 personnel from Army Rangers, Marine Force Recon, and various support units had gathered for what was supposed to be a routine qualification day. The humidity hung thick in the air, mixing with gun oil and testosterone, creating an atmosphere that was part gymnasium, part proving ground. Elena returned to her workstation without a word. Her movements remained measured and deliberate as she continued inspecting the rack of M4 carbines awaiting distribution. Her fingers moved across each weapon with a precision that seemed almost supernatural. Checking chambers, testing trigger assemblies, examining firing pins under the harsh fluorescent lights of the armory alcove. Each inspection took exactly 47 seconds. Not 46, not 48, exactly 47 seconds per weapon. Derek Vaughn watched her retreat with barely concealed contempt. He turned to his group of rangers, voice pitched to carry across the yard. 20 minutes behind schedule because some grease monkey thinks she knows weapons better than soldiers who actually use them. Sergeant First Class Sarah Bradshaw materialized at his elbow, clipboard pressed against her chest like armor. The admin NCO had a face that seemed permanently set in disapproval, and her eyes tracked Elena with the kind of disdain usually reserved for something stuck to the bottom of a boot. Her blonde hair was pulled back so tight it seemed to stretch her features into a permanent scowl. "I've been trying to get her transferred for weeks." Sarah's voice carried the satisfaction of someone who'd found a kindred spirit in prejudice. "She doesn't follow protocol, questions everything, acts like she's better than everyone else." Protocol, Derek snorted the sound, mixing contempt with something uglier. She needs to learn her place. From the armorer station, Specialist Caleb Morrison joined the conversation, his voice carrying a whine of wounded pride. He was 26 but carried himself like a man who'd never been truly tested. She flagged 3 of my weapons this morning, said the firing pins showed irregular wear patterns. I've been doing this job for 4 years. 4 years, and some cleaning lady thinks she can tell me my business. Private First Class Logan Hart, barely 22 and desperate to prove himself, laughed too loudly at everything his superior said. The kind of nervous laughter that comes from wanting to belong more than wanting to be decent. Maybe she's got a thing for guns since she can't get a man to look at her. The comment drew scattered chuckles from the younger trainees. None of them noticed the way Master Sergeant Isaac Thornton's jaw tightened at the far end of the range. None of them saw the way his hand, weathered by 62 years of life and 38 years of service, clenched into a fist before deliberately relaxing. Elena didn't react. She simply held up the M4 that had started the confrontation, her small hands steady as she worked the charging handle. The weapon's bolt carrier group slid free with a whisper of metal on metal, and she held the firing pin up to the light. Sunlight caught the component, illuminating imperfections invisible to untrained eyes. This pin has asymmetric wear on the tip. Her voice was quiet, almost clinical. The voice of someone stating facts, not seeking argument. Approximately 0.3 millimeters of deviation. Under sustained fire, it will fracture within 100 rounds, possibly fewer. Caleb's face reddened. That's within acceptable tolerances. Acceptable for a training weapon that won't see combat. Elena set the pin down with careful precision, the movement somehow final. Your Rangers are deploying to Syria in 6 weeks. Sergeant Vaughn mentioned it himself this morning. This weapon will fail them when they need it most. The silence that followed was thick enough to cut. Suddenly, the casual cruelty felt less like entertainment and more like watching a professional dismantle an amateur. Not through aggression, but through pure competence. Derek stepped forward, his boots heavy on the concrete. Each step designed to intimidate through sheer physical presence. How do you know about our deployment? Elena's expression didn't change. Her dark eyes met his without flinching, without showing anything at all. You announced it to 30 trainees at 07:15 this morning. Sound carries. Sound carries? He mimicked her tone voice, dripping with mockery. He turned to his audience again, playing to the crowd. Listen to this. The cleaning lady has opinions about combat deployments now. Captain Hugo Barnett appeared from the administrative building, drawn by the commotion. The training officer had the look of a man who valued smooth operations above all else. His uniform was pressed to knife-edge creases, his expression professionally neutral. The kind of officer who had spent more time behind a desk than in the field, and who compensated for it by maintaining absolute control over his domain. What's the holdup? Derek straightened, sensing an opportunity for validation. Sir, this technician is refusing to release properly inspected weapons. She's overstepping her authority. Barnett's gaze swept over Elena, dismissing her in a single glance. The look of a man who'd already categorized her, filed her away in a mental drawer labeled support staff, and moved on. You're here to maintain and distribute equipment as directed. Do your job and let the professionals handle the rest. Yes, sir. Elena's response was automatic, her face betraying nothing. But Sergeant Fern Gallagher, who had been watching from the supply depot doorway, caught something in the set of Elena's shoulders. An attention that didn't match her submissive words. A coiled readiness that spoke of training far beyond maintenance procedures. Fern had been in the Army long enough to recognize the difference between someone who was beaten and someone who was choosing not to fight. She'd seen it before in soldiers who'd come back from places they couldn't talk about, doing jobs they'd never acknowledge. The way they moved, the way they watched, the way they existed in spaces as if always calculating angles and exits. She approached Elena as the confrontation temporarily dispersed the crowd, moving toward the shooting lanes for the morning's first qualification round. Hey you, okay. Elena looked up, and for just a moment something human flickered behind her guarded expression. Recognition of kindness in a place that had offered precious little. I'm fine, Sergeant Gallagher. Fern, we've been over this. She leaned against the workbench, keeping her voice low, creating a bubble of privacy in the public space. You should report him. That was assault. Clear as day. He's got connections. Elena resumed her inspection of the weapon rack, her movements never faltering. Friends in high places. I've seen his type before. They always have protection. Fern studied her colleague's profile, noting the faint scar that traced along her jawline, the kind of scar that didn't come from kitchen accidents or automotive mishaps, the kind that came from violence survived and healed. She noted the calluses on Elena's hands too thick for someone who'd just cleaned weapons, the way her eyes constantly scanned the environment, even while her hands worked tracking movement, assessing threats, maintaining awareness. Where'd you serve? The question hung in the air, loaded with implications. Elena was quiet for a beat too long. I'm just a technician, started 4 years ago, nothing special. But Fern had been a supply NCO for 12 years. She knew how to read people, how to spot the things they tried to hide. And everything about Elena Blackwell screamed that nothing special was the biggest lie she'd ever heard. The morning progressed with the grinding efficiency of military routine. Trainees cycled through the qualification lanes in groups of 8, their rifle reports creating a staccato rhythm that echoed off the concrete barriers. Derek prowled the firing line like a predator, his voice a constant bark of criticism and condescension. Finding fault, demanding perfection, using his authority like a blunt instrument. Elena worked in the background, invisible to most essential to all. She cleared jammed weapons, replaced worn components, ensured that every trainee who stepped up to the line had a functioning rifle in their hands. Her movements were efficient, almost choreographed, each motion flowing into the next with a precision that seemed unconscious. The product of repetition burned so deep it had become instinct. Corporal Aidan Murphy stood at lane 7, his hands trembling so badly that the M4 shook in his grip. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the morning's relative cool, and his breathing came in short, sharp gasps that had nothing to do with physical exertion. 20 years old and already carrying ghosts. His eyes had the 1,000-yard stare of someone who'd seen things that didn't fit in the neat boxes the civilian world demanded. Elena noticed. Of course she noticed. She set down the rifle she was cleaning and made her way to his station, her approach so quiet that he didn't hear her until she spoke. Square your shoulders. Murphy flinched, nearly dropping his weapon. His finger went dangerously close to the trigger, muscle memory from some other place, some other time, trying to take over. Easy. Her voice was low, meant only for him. Gentle without being condescending. Keep your finger indexed along the receiver. Good. Now take a breath. Hold it. Let half out. His breathing steadied almost against his will. The trembling in his hands decreased by measurable degrees. The target isn't the enemy. She adjusted his elbow position with a gentle touch, the kind of correction that came from understanding, not judgment. It's just a piece of paper. Paper can't hurt you. How did you? He couldn't finish the question. Couldn't articulate the confusion, the relief, the sudden understanding that someone else knew. Someone else understood. I've seen that look before. She stepped back, giving him space, giving him dignity. You're not alone, Corporal, and it doesn't make you weak. Before he could respond, Derek's voice cut across the range like a blade. What the hell do you think you're doing? Elena turned to face him, her expression neutral, professional, giving him nothing to grasp, nothing to use against her. His sight alignment was off. His sight alignment is my concern. Derek stepped into her personal space using his height to intimidate his physical presence as a weapon. You touch one of my trainees again and I'll have you scrubbing latrines for a month. Matter of fact, I think you owe Private Webb over there an apology. He's been waiting 15 minutes for his weapon because you're too busy playing instructor. Logan Pierce appeared at Derek's shoulder, a smirk spreading across his face like an infection. Maybe she needs a reminder of where she belongs. He shoved a cart of empty magazines toward Elena with enough force to send it careening into her hip. The impact was deliberate, calculated. Not enough to cause serious injury, but enough to hurt. Enough to humiliate. She stumbled, but didn't fall. Her foot slid back in a lateral pivot, her weight redistributing with fluid grace. Her balance recovered in a fraction of a second, the movement so smooth it seemed almost rehearsed. Almost like something drilled into muscle memory through countless repetitions. Master Sergeant Isaac Thornton saw it from 30 yards away. His coffee cup stopped halfway to his lips. His eyes, pale gray and sharper than his 62 years should allow, tracked the movement with the analytical precision of someone who'd spent decades studying human motion in combat situations. That wasn't a stumble recovery. That was a trained response. Specific, deliberate. The kind of thing they drilled into you until it became reflex, until your body responded faster than your conscious mind could process. He'd seen that exact movement in one place during one assignment he wasn't supposed to talk about. Coronado, California, the place where they made SEALs. Oops, Logan laughed, not even bothering to pretend it was an accident. His eyes gleamed with the cruelty of someone who'd never faced real consequences. Elena said nothing. She simply righted the cart and began organizing the scattered magazines with methodical precision. Each magazine placed with exact spacing, each movement controlled, each breath measured. Across the training yard, Lieutenant Chloe Brennan was conducting medical checks on the personnel rotating through the evaluation. The medical officer had sharp eyes and sharper instincts honed by 2 deployments to Kandahar, where she'd learned to read wounds to understand trauma in all its forms. When Elena passed her station to retrieve a replacement barrel, something caught her attention. The technician's sleeve had ridden up, exposing her forearm. Scars, not the neat surgical kind for medical procedures. These were rough patterned, the distinctive marks left by high-velocity shrapnel. Chloe had seen enough combat injuries during her deployment to recognize them instantly. Those weren't maintenance accidents. Those were war wounds. She made a mental note to pull Elena's medical records when she got back to her office. Something about this woman didn't add up. The pieces didn't fit the picture everyone else seemed to see. The morning's first crisis came at 11:47. A trainee at Lane 3, barely 19 and green as grass, had somehow managed to load a round while his weapon was pointed away from the range. The sound of the discharge was deafening in the enclosed space. The bullet punched through the ceiling of the covered firing station, sending chunks of concrete raining down like deadly hail. Panic rippled through the trainees like a shockwave. Instructors shouted contradictory orders. Move back. Stay still. Put your weapon down. Keep your weapon up. The chaos of fear without leadership. The young soldier stood frozen, weapon still in his trembling hands. The barrel swept dangerously across the crowded range as he turned, trying to understand what had happened, what he'd done. 83 people in the path of a loaded weapon held by someone in the grip of panic. Elena moved. She covered the 15 feet between her station and Lane 3 in under 2 seconds. No hesitation. No calculation. Just movement, pure and immediate. Her hand closed over the rifle's barrel, pushing it toward the ground with controlled force while her other hand found the magazine release. The magazine dropped. Her palm slapped the bolt catch, locking the action open. She cleared the chamber by touch, her eyes never leaving the terrified trainee's face. You're okay. Her voice was calm, steady. The eye of the storm, the single point of control in absolute chaos. Weapons safe. Everyone's safe. Breathe. The whole sequence had taken less than 2 seconds. 1.8 seconds from movement to resolution. From potential tragedy to controlled situation. Silence fell over the range. Not the silence of peace, but the silence of shock. Of witnessing something that shouldn't have been possible. Isaac Thornton set down his coffee cup very carefully. His hands, steady as they'd been for 38 years of service, showed the faintest tremor. Beside him, Command Sergeant Major Elijah Grant had gone very still. His dark face had taken on an expression of dawning realization. Isaac, Grant's voice was barely above a whisper. Did you see that? I saw it. That wasn't basic training. That wasn't even advanced training. I know. That was operator-level response time. Instinct, muscle memory. Grant turned to look at the small woman now helping the shaken trainee sit down on a nearby bench. Who the hell is she? Isaac had no answer. But he intended to find out. He'd spent 6 months in 1991 and attached to SEAL teams during Desert Storm reconnaissance operations. He'd seen the best operators in the world work. He knew what true expertise looked like when stripped of rank and ceremony. And what he'd just witnessed was expertise of the highest order. Derek Vaughn, however, saw only an opportunity to reassert dominance. He stormed across the range, face purple with rage, each step heavy with barely contained violence. Who gave you permission to touch that trainee? Who gave you permission to handle a weapon malfunction? You're a technician. You maintain equipment. That's all you are. That's all you'll ever be. Elena straightened to face him, and for just a moment, Isaac thought he saw something flicker in her eyes. Not fear, not anger, something colder, something that looked like calculation. The weapon was pointed at 34 people, including 3 officers and the base commander. For the first time, Derek registered that Colonel Pierce had been watching from the observation platform. The colonel's face was unreadable, carved from stone by 6 decades of keeping secrets. But his presence added weight to the moment, turned a personal confrontation into something that would have consequences. I don't care if it was pointed at the president. Derek's voice dropped to a dangerous hiss, the kind of quiet that's more threatening than shouting. You do not step outside your lane, ever. Am I clear? Crystal clear, Staff Sergeant. The words were compliant. The tone was not. And everyone within earshot heard the difference, heard the careful control, heard the restraint that suggested reserves of strength still untapped. Elena pulled out a small tactical flashlight from her pocket, the kind with aircraft-grade aluminum housing and 1,200 lumens of pure brightness. In the field, equipment like this meant the difference between spotting an IED wire and stepping on one. Every special operations unit swore by these compact military-spec flashlights. Some tools simply couldn't be compromised. She clicked it on, illuminating the M4's chamber with surgical precision. The light was steady, unwavering. Professional. She returned to inspecting the malfunctioning weapon, her movements unhurried, professional, completely unconcerned with the fury radiating from the man standing over her, as if his anger was whether something external and ultimately irrelevant. Sarah Bradshaw appeared at Derek's elbow, her voice a poisonous whisper. I ran her personnel file again. It's almost empty. Basic identification, employment, start date, medical clearance. Nothing before 4 years ago, no prior service record, no education history, no emergency contacts. So she's a ghost. Derek's eyes narrowed, focusing on Elena with renewed intensity. Or she's hiding something. Sarah's smile was thin and cold. Or both. I've submitted a formal inquiry. If she's got skeletons, we'll find them. From the observation platform, Colonel Pierce watched the exchange with hooded eyes. Beside him, civilian contractor Francis Webb worked at a laptop, his fingers dancing across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. Anything? Pierce asked, voice pitched for privacy. Webb hesitated, his expression troubled. Her file is locked, sir. Standard access gets you name rank position. Anything deeper requires clearance I don't have. What level? 5, sir. Maybe higher. Pierce said nothing for a long moment. Level 5 clearance was reserved for classified operations. Black projects. Assets whose very existence was compartmentalized beyond normal military channels. The kind of clearance that meant someone's service record wasn't just classified, it was erased. Made to never exist in the first place. Keep trying, he said finally quietly. Then added almost to himself, though I suspect I already know what you'll find. The afternoon brought a tactical exercise. A mock assault on a simulated enemy position, complete with blank rounds and smoke grenades designed to create chaos without casualties. The trainees were divided into teams, each led by an instructor, competing to clear the building with the fastest time and fewest simulated casualties. Elena continued her maintenance work on the periphery, servicing the training weapons as they cycled through the exercise. She appeared to pay no attention to the tactical discussions happening around her. But Specialist Madison Fitzgerald noticed that Elena's ears seemed to track every conversation, every instruction, every correction, as if she was listening not just to the words, but to the underlying competence or lack thereof. Hey, Madison, a female trainee who had been watching Elena all morning, approached during a lull in the action, 24 years old with red hair and a determination that bordered on fierce. That thing you did with the guy who almost shot everyone, that was incredible. Elena looked up from her work, her expression neutral. I just reacted. Bull. Madison caught herself, glanced around, lowered her voice. Sorry, but that wasn't just reacting. I've been in the Army 2 years. I've never seen anyone move that fast. That precisely. Training helps. But what kind of training teaches you to disarm a panicked soldier in under 2 seconds? Elena's hands never stopped moving, but her eyes met Madison's for a brief moment. Dark eyes that held depths the younger woman couldn't quite fathom. The kind that keeps you alive when everything goes wrong. Before Madison could press further, Derek's voice boomed across the yard. All right, listen up. Caleb here says our cleaning lady thinks she knows more about weapons than our certified armorer, so let's settle this. He gestured expansively, playing to the crowd that had begun to gather. Sensing drama, sensing blood in the water. Disassembly competition, Caleb versus the janitor. Loser admits they don't know what they're talking about. Murmurs rippled through the assembled personnel. Even the trainees could smell what was coming. This wasn't about weapons anymore. This was about power, about putting someone in their place, about maintaining an order that certain people found comfortable. Caleb stepped forward, cracking his knuckles with theatrical confidence. I've been doing this for 4 years, hold an expert rating in 3 weapon platforms. Let's see what cleaning bathrooms teaches you. Elena didn't move from her station, didn't acknowledge the challenge, didn't give Derek the satisfaction of a response. What's wrong? Derek's voice carried mockery like a weapon sharp and designed to wound. Scared, or did you finally realize you're out of your depth? I have work to do, Staff Sergeant. Elena's voice remained level, professional. These weapons need to be ready for the afternoon qualification. Work can wait. This is about respect, about knowing your place. Derek stepped closer, using his size to intimidate his presence as a physical threat. Unless you want me to tell Colonel Pierce that you're refusing a direct order. It wasn't a direct order. Everyone knew it. But the power dynamic was clear. The threat implicit. Refuse and face consequences. Comply and face humiliation. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. Elena set down her tools with careful precision. Each implement placed exactly where it belonged. Then she looked up at Derek, and for just a moment, something flickered in her eyes. Something that made Isaac Thornton, watching from across the yard, straighten to attention. Fine. A space was cleared in the center of the training yard. 2 M4 carbines were placed on a table identical in every way. Standard military issue. The kind of weapon every soldier in the facility could disassemble in their sleep. Caleb took his position with the swagger of a man who had already won, who knew exactly how this would play out. 4 years of daily practice against a cleaning woman who probably barely knew which end the bullets came out of. Elena stood opposite, her expression blank, her stance relaxed, her breathing steady, waiting. Standard disassembly and reassembly, Derek announced, loving every moment of this. First one to present a function-checked weapon wins. Ready. Caleb nodded, rolling his shoulders, preparing for performance. Elena said nothing, just waited, patient, still. Go. Caleb's hands moved with practiced efficiency, the movements of a man who had performed this task thousands of times. Pins out, bolt carrier group free, trigger assembly separated. His fingers flew, muscle memory taking over. 47 seconds. He slapped the charging handle, pointed the weapon at the ground, pulled the trigger. Click. Function check complete. Done. He looked up, triumph on his face. Then he saw where everyone else was looking. Elena stood motionless, her weapon already reassembled, already function checked, resting on the table in front of her. Her eyes were closed. Her breathing was slow and even. Her hands were empty. Time, someone asked the word, barely more than a whisper. Isaac checked his watch, though he'd been counting in his head. 12 seconds. The silence was absolute. Not the silence of shock this time. The silence of witnessing something impossible become real. That's impossible, Caleb breathed. His face had gone pale. No one can. I've seen instructors who can't. She didn't even look, Madison whispered to the trainee beside her, her voice carrying awe. She did the whole thing with her eyes closed. Warrant Officer Jasper Reed pushed through the crowd. 44 years old, a helicopter pilot who had flown more extract missions than he cared to count. His eyes locked on Elena with an intensity that made nearby soldiers step aside. He'd seen something, recognized something. What's your call sign? The question cut through the silence like a blade. Elena opened her eyes, met his gaze without flinching. I'm just a maintenance technician, sir. I've flown extract missions for Tier 1 operators for 8 years. Jasper stepped closer, his voice dropping, but somehow carrying further. I know what buds graduates look like when they handle weapons. I know how they move, how they think, how they exist in the world. He paused, studying her face, searching for confirmation of what he already knew. What is your call sign? I don't have one. The lie was smooth, practiced, utterly unconvincing to anyone who knew what to look for. Isaac pulled Command Sergeant Major Grant aside, speaking in urgent whispers. That disassembly time, that level of proficiency. Eyes closed, which means it's muscle memory so deep she doesn't need visual confirmation. There's only one place that produces operators like that. Grant finished the thought. You think she's a SEAL? I think she's something. Grant looked across the yard to where Colonel Pierce stood, watching his face, betraying nothing. And I think whatever it is, it's classified above our pay grade. He knows. Isaac's voice was flat with certainty. Look at him. Pierce knows exactly who she is. Then why isn't he saying anything? That, Grant said slowly, is the interesting question. Derek wasn't finished. The humiliation of watching a cleaning lady outperform his hand-picked armorer demanded retribution, demanded some way to restore the natural order of things. He snatched an M9 Beretta from the nearest rack, ejected the magazine, cleared the chamber with unnecessary force. Anybody can play with parts when you have memorized the movements. Let's see if you can actually shoot. He thrust the weapon toward Elena, his expression savage. Firing range, 50 yards, standard qualification course. Staff Sergeant Captain Barnett began finally sensing that this had gone too far. What she's already proved is she thinks she's better than everyone. Let's give her a chance to prove it. Derek's smile was cruel predatory. Unless she wants to admit she's just a parts monkey who got lucky. Elena looked at the Beretta in his outstretched hand. For a long moment she didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, weighing something that only she could see. I'm not qualified for weapons discharge on this facility, she said finally. I'll qualify you. Derek shoved the weapon into her hands. Right now. Move. The crowd followed, sensing drama, sensing something building toward a conclusion they couldn't quite predict. By the time they reached the pistol range, nearly 60 people had gathered, word spreading through the base like wildfire. Something's happening, something big. Derek loaded a fresh magazine, handed it to Elena with exaggerated care. 15 rounds, 50 yards. Let's see what you've got. Elena approached the firing line with measured steps. She loaded the magazine, chambered a round, raised the weapon in a textbook Weaver stance. But something was wrong. Her right hand trembled slightly, a barely perceptible vibration that anyone looking closely could see. What's the matter? Logan called out, emboldened by Derek's presence, by the crowd's anticipation. Scared of a little bang. Elena adjusted her grip, steadied her breathing, and fired. The first round hit 6 inches left of the target. The second went high. By the fifth shot, her grouping was scattered across a 2-foot radius, not a single round touching center mass. Laughter erupted from the crowd, relieved laughter, the natural order restored. The cleaning lady put back in her place. This is priceless. Caleb crowed, his earlier humiliation forgotten in the joy of someone else's failure. Fastest disassembly I've ever seen, and she can't hit the broadside of a building. Technician accuracy. Derek smirked, satisfaction radiating from him like heat. All theory, no practice. Maybe stick to what you know, sweetheart. Logan was practically dancing with glee. Should have stayed in the kitchen. But Isaac wasn't laughing. His eyes had moved past the 50-yard target to the 200-yard marker at the far end of the range. He set down his coffee cup with trembling hands, his breath caught in his throat. 5 holes, grouped so tightly they nearly touched, arranged in a perfect pentagon at 200 yards. Holy God, he breathed. Staff Sergeant Blake Ortiz followed his gaze and went pale. She wasn't missing. She was shooting a different target. Isaac did the math in his head. 200 yards, iron sights, with a pistol designed for maximum accuracy at 25 yards. And she'd put 5 rounds into a pattern that Olympic shooters would struggle to match with proper equipment. Who does that? Ortiz asked, his voice barely audible over the continuing laughter. Someone who wanted us to know she could. Isaac's voice was flat, final. Someone who's been holding back, showing us just enough to make a point without revealing what she really is. The laughter died as others began to notice where Isaac was looking. One by one heads turned. Murmurs replaced mockery. Understanding dawned on faces that had been so certain of their superiority just moments before. Derek's smirk faltered. What? What is everyone looking at? Gunnery Sergeant Connor Dalton walked slowly to the 200-yard marker. Marine Scout sniper, veteran of 3 deployments, a man who understood precision in a way most soldiers never would. He stared at the target for a long moment, his weathered face showing something that might have been awe. Then he turned back to face the crowd, his voice carrying across the range with the weight of professional acknowledgement. 5 rounds, 200-yard target, Pentagon grouping, with iron sights on a pistol. He paused, letting that sink in, letting everyone understand what they were really looking at. I've seen Marine Scout snipers who couldn't do that with a rifle. She just did it with a sidearm to prove a point without saying a word. She missed, Derek insisted, but his voice had lost its conviction. The certainty was crumbling. She clearly missed the target right in front of her. She hit exactly what she was aiming at. Isaac stepped forward, positioning himself between Derek and Elena. His 62 years of experience suddenly carrying an authority that rank alone couldn't convey. The question is why she bothered to make it look like she missed at first. Elena ejected the magazine, cleared the chamber, set the weapon down on the bench with careful precision. Her face revealed nothing. No pride, no satisfaction, no emotion at all. I'm done here. She turned to walk back to her station. I have work to do. Hold on. Colonel Pierce descended from the observation platform, his stride purposeful. The crowd parted before him like water before a ship's bow. 64 years of command presence made manifest. Technician Blackwell, a word. Elena stopped, stood at attention, waited. That was quite a demonstration. Pierce's voice was measured, careful, each word chosen with precision. Where did you learn to shoot like that? Practice, sir, lots of practice. Practice, and saying, Pierce let the word hang in the air, testing its weight, finding it insufficient. Will be any progress on that file? The contractor looked up from his laptop. Face troubled, more than troubled, disturbed. Sir, I've hit a wall. Her file isn't just locked, it's flagged. Any deeper access attempts trigger an automatic notification to... He trailed off, swallowing hard. To whom? Sir, I'm not even authorized to know who gets notified. Pierce nodded slowly as if confirming something he already suspected. As if pieces of a puzzle he'd been working on for 4 years had finally clicked into place. Very well, carry on, technician. As Elena walked away, Pierce caught Isaac's eye and gave an almost imperceptible nod. A silent communication between men who'd spent lifetimes learning to speak without words. Something was happening here. Something that went far beyond a simple personality conflict. Something that had been building for 4 years, waiting for exactly the right moment to emerge. And whatever it was about to blow wide open. Master Sergeant Isaac Thornton had seen too many veterans struggle after service. That's why he'd invested early in veteran-focused financial planning, the kind that understood military benefits, VA loans, and transition challenges. Smart money management wasn't just for officers. Every enlisted soldier deserved a secure future. He made a mental note to mention it to the younger troops watching this unfold, though right now his mind was elsewhere. He approached Elena at her workstation, keeping his voice low. The afternoon sun slanted through the armory windows, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. You know you just painted a target on your back. There was already a target there, Master Sergeant. Elena's hands continued their methodical work, inspecting firing pins, with the same precision she'd shown all day. Every day for 4 years. Fair enough, he leaned against the bench watching her work, studying the economy of her movements, the unconscious efficiency that spoke of training so deep it had become identity. I worked with SEAL teams during Desert Storm, reconnaissance operations in 1991, saw a lot of operators come through. The good ones, the ones who survived, they all had something in common. Elena didn't look up. I wouldn't know anything about that. A certain way of moving, of watching, of waiting. Isaac's voice hardened slightly, not with anger, but with certainty. The disassembly, the shooting, the way you took down that weapon malfunction. I know what I saw. I know what I'm looking at. For a long moment, Elena said nothing, just continued her inspection, her fingers moving across metal with the delicate precision of a surgeon. Then so quietly that Isaac had to lean in to hear she spoke. Some missions don't end when you come home, Master Sergeant. Some people carry them forever. Before he could respond, shouting erupted from the tactical training area. Derek had corralled his rangers for an impromptu close-quarters combat demonstration, and his choice of volunteer had not been random. You, he pointed at Elena across the yard, his voice carrying the weight of challenged authority. Get over here. Isaac tensed. You don't have to do this. Yes, I do. Elena set down her tools with careful precision, each implement placed exactly where it belonged. He won't stop until he's proven something, and I'm running out of ways to let him. She walked toward the CQC pit, and the crowd parted around her. 60 soldiers, maybe more now. Word had spread through the base like wildfire. The maintenance tech who shot like a ghost. The cleaning lady who could disassemble a rifle faster than their expert armorer. Everyone wanted to see what would happen next. Derek stood in the center of the pit, bouncing on the balls of his feet. His grin was sharp and predatory, the expression of a man who'd finally cornered his prey. Since our cleaning lady thinks she's such hot stuff, let's see how she handles actual combat. He gestured expansively to the surrounding trainees. Basic defensive techniques. I'll demonstrate. She'll be my partner. Partner was a generous term. Everyone knew what was coming. This wasn't instruction. This was retribution. This was about restoring an order that had been challenged, questioned, undermined by someone who should have known better than to rise above her station. Elena stepped into the pit without hesitation. She stood in a neutral stance, hands at her sides, face empty of expression. But Isaac noticed what others might have missed. Her breathing was controlled, measured. Her pulse visible at her throat remained steady. Her weight was distributed, perfectly ready to move in any direction. She wasn't nervous. She was waiting. First technique, Derek circled her like a shark. What to do when someone grabs you from behind. He moved fast, faster than necessary for a demonstration. His arm wrapped around Elena's throat in a chokehold that was just a little too tight. Professional enough to claim instruction. Personal enough to hurt. In a real situation, you'd be dead already. His voice was pitched for the audience. But let's pretend you have time to react. What would you do? Elena didn't answer, didn't struggle, just stood there, his arm crushing her windpipe, her face beginning to redden from restricted blood flow. Nothing really. Derek increased the pressure slightly. Not enough to cause serious damage, just enough to make breathing difficult, just enough to make the humiliation complete. Maybe you should tap out, admit you're in over your head. Still nothing, but Isaac noticed something the others missed. Elena's breathing hadn't changed. Despite the chokehold, despite the pressure, her heart rate remained steady. The pulse at her throat, what he could see of it around Derek's arm, beat with metronomic precision. She wasn't panicking. She was waiting. Choosing her moment with the patience of someone who'd learned that survival often meant knowing exactly when to act. Fine, let me show everyone what happens when you freeze up in combat. Derek shifted his grip, preparing to take her to the ground in a move that would be humiliating at best, injurious at worst. Elena moved. Her elbow drove backward into his solar plexus. Not hard enough to injure, but enough to loosen his grip. Just enough to create space. Her hips dropped and rotated, her center of gravity shifting beneath his in a movement so fluid it seemed choreographed. One hand caught his wrist, while the other pressed against his elbow joint. And suddenly Derek was airborne. He flipped over her shoulder, his 190-pound frame moving through space with the helpless grace of a thrown doll. He landed flat on his back in the sand with an impact that drove the air from his lungs in an explosive gasp. Time elapsed 1.4 seconds. Elena released him immediately, stepping back to her neutral position as if nothing had happened. As if she hadn't just thrown a man nearly twice her size with less effort than it took to lift a rifle. The silence was deafening. Not shock this time. Something deeper. Something that felt like the moment before a storm breaks. Derek scrambled to his feet, face crimson with rage and humiliation. Sand clung to his uniform, his carefully maintained appearance shattered. Lucky throw. Let's go again. He charged at her, abandoning all pretense of instruction. His fist swung toward her face in an attack that had nothing to do with training and everything to do with wounded pride, with the desperate need to reassert dominance through violence. Elena's head slipped to the side, the blow missing by millimeters. Her hand caught his wrist, redirecting his momentum using his own force against him. And suddenly he was past her, stumbling off balance. His attack turned into awkward forward motion. She didn't pursue, didn't counterattack, just returned to her neutral stance and waited. Come on. Derek spun, his composure completely shattered. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool afternoon air. Fight back. Stop running. I'm not running, Staff Sergeant. Elena's voice was calm, almost gentle, the tone of someone explaining something obvious to a child. I'm defending. There's a difference. He came at her again, faster this time, more desperate. A combination of strikes designed to overwhelm through sheer aggression. Haymakers and body shots thrown with the wild abandon of someone who'd lost all tactical sense. Elena flowed around them like water, redirecting, deflecting, never retaliating, never escalating. Each movement was precise, economical, almost beautiful in its efficiency. The difference between someone who'd learned violence as theory and someone who'd perfected it as art. Logan Hart, seeing his mentor humiliated, decided to intervene. He launched himself at Elena from behind, arms outstretched to tackle her. The loyal follower coming to his leader's aid, desperate to prove his value through violence. Elena heard him coming. Of course she heard him coming. Without turning, she stepped aside at the last possible moment. Her hand caught his outstretched arm, using his own momentum against him. Logan went sprawling into the sand, his attack turned into an ungraceful tumble. Now she faced both of them. Derek in front, Logan scrambling up from behind. They exchanged a glance, and some unspoken agreement passed between them. 2 against 1. Surely the numbers would make the difference. They attacked together. What happened next would be discussed in hushed whispers for months afterward, would become legend among the trainees who witnessed it, would be the story that new recruits heard when they asked about the maintenance tech, who everyone treated with careful respect. Elena dropped low, sweeping Logan's legs out from under him, while simultaneously blocking Derek's downward strike. She rose like a wave flowing past Logan's falling body. Her movement put him between her and Derek, turning his ally into an obstacle. When Derek tried to circle around, she was already repositioning, always keeping her attackers in front of her, always maintaining control of the space, using geometry and positioning to compensate for size and strength. In under 10 seconds, both men were on the ground, breathing hard, unable to land a single clean hit, and Elena hadn't thrown a single offensive strike. Every movement had been defensive. Control without injury, dominance without violence. Enough! Colonel Pierce's voice cracked across the pit like a whip. Everyone froze. The spell broken by command authority that transcended the immediate chaos. Pierce descended into the pit, his face carved from stone. 64 years of military service compressed into an expression that promised consequences. Staff Sergeant Vaughn, explain yourself. Derek struggled to his feet, sand-coating his uniform like shame made visible. Sir, I was conducting a training demonstration. What I saw was an instructor attacking a civilian support staff member. Pierce's voice dropped to a dangerous register, the kind of quiet that was more threatening than shouting. What I saw was a coordinated assault by 2 soldiers on a single unarmed woman. Sir, Derek's protest died in his throat. She defended herself without causing injury to either of you. Pierce stepped closer, his presence filling the pit with the weight of absolute authority. Which is more than you deserve. Report to my office, now. Derek's mouth opened and closed. His face cycled through emotions too quickly to track. Finally, he managed a strangled, "Yes, sir." As he trudged away, Logan limping behind him, Pierce turned to Elena. Something complicated moved behind his eyes. Recognition, respect, and something that looked almost like apology. "Are you injured, Technician Blackwell?" "No, sir." "Good." He paused, seemed to wrestle with something. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of knowledge carefully revealed. That was Krav Maga combined with something else. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, perhaps, and something I don't recognize. Something more refined, more specific. Elena met his gaze without flinching. I picked up things here and there, sir. Here and there. Pierce nodded slowly, the ghost of a smile touching his weathered face. Of course you have. He turned and walked away, leaving Elena standing alone in the center of the pit, surrounded by silent, staring soldiers who were beginning to understand that everything they'd assumed about the small woman in the oil-stained uniform was wrong. The aftermath unfolded with the inevitability of a gathering storm. Derek sat in Colonel Pierce's office for 47 minutes. When he emerged, his face was pale and his swagger was gone. He returned to the training yard with the careful movements of a man walking on broken glass. But he wasn't finished. Humiliation festered in him like an infected wound demanding release, demanding some way to restore what had been taken. He found Elena at her workstation, methodically preparing weapons for the afternoon qualification round. The crowd had dispersed, most personnel moving to the mess hall for lunch. Only a handful of witnesses remained. You think you're clever, don't you? His voice was low, venomous, the quiet fury of someone who'd lost everything and needed someone to blame. Making me look bad in front of everyone. Elena didn't look up. Her hands continued their work with the same methodical precision. I was just defending myself, Staff Sergeant. You were showing off, playing games. He leaned closer, close enough that she could smell the coffee on his breath, the sweat of exertion and fear. But here's the thing about games, I always win. I'm not playing any games. Then what are you playing at? His hand shot out, grabbing the front of her uniform, bunching the fabric in his fist. Who are you, really? Where did you learn to fight like that? Why is your file locked behind level 5 clearance? Let go of me. Elena's voice remained level, but something had changed, a hardness entering her tone that hadn't been there before. Not until you answer my questions. His grip tightened, pulling her slightly off balance. You've been here 4 years, 4 years of acting like you're invisible. And suddenly you're disarming panicked trainees and throwing trained rangers around like dolls. Nobody's that good, nobody. Logan appeared at his shoulder, his expression eager despite the bruises forming on his face, despite the humiliation of being swept aside like a child. Maybe she's a CIA foreign operative planted here to gather intel. Shut up, Logan. But Derek's eyes didn't leave Elena's face. I'm going to find out what you're hiding. And when I do, I'm going to make sure everyone knows you're a fraud. He shoved her backward. Elena stumbled her hip, catching the edge of the workbench. Her shirt pulled tight across her shoulder, the aged fabric stressed beyond its limit. And with a sound like tearing paper, the seam gave way. Time stopped. Because there exposed on her right shoulder was a tattoo that every soldier in the United States military would recognize instantly. A golden eagle wing spread wide in flight, clutching a trident in one talon and a flintlock pistol in the other. Surrounded by an anchor, the symbol of naval heritage. And below it, in stark black letters that seemed to burn against her skin, Team 8, the trident, the symbol of the Navy SEALs, the most elite special operations force in the world. The warriors who operated in shadows, whose missions were never acknowledged, whose very existence was often classified. Logan made a sound like a dying animal, a whimper of recognition and sudden absolute terror. Master Sergeant Isaac Thornton, who had been approaching with questions of his own, stopped dead in his tracks. His hand rose to his forehead in an automatic salute before his conscious mind even registered what he was seeing. Senior Chief. The words came out as a breath, as a prayer, as an acknowledgement of something sacred. Command Sergeant Major Elijah Grant had been walking past when the commotion began. Now he stood frozen, his dark face draining of color, as realization dawned like a terrible sunrise. My God, Operation Iron Serpent. The name rippled through the remaining witnesses like an electric current. Operation Iron Serpent, the classified mission that had been whispered about in intelligence circles for 4 years. The operation that was never officially confirmed, never officially denied. The ghost story that operators told in private when they thought no one else was listening. Colonel Pierce emerged from his office at the sound of Isaac's raised voice. He took in the scene with a single glance. Elena's torn shirt, the exposed tattoo, the stunned faces, and something shifted in his expression. Authority settled over him like a mantle, transforming him from base commander to something more. Something that spoke of classified briefings and operations that existed only in sealed files. Senior Chief Elena Blackwell, his voice carried across the training yard, commanding attention from every person within earshot. Call sign Phantom, SEAL Team 8, 9 combat deployments, 52 confirmed operations. The words fell like hammer blows, each one striking with the weight of absolute truth. Bronze Star with Valor, 3 Purple Hearts. Around them, soldiers were beginning to emerge from buildings, drawn by the commotion, by the sound of Pierce's voice carrying across the base with unusual intensity. Within minutes, every person on the training complex would know, would hear, would understand. Operation Iron Serpent, Raqqa, Syria, March 2021. Pierce continued, his voice resonating with the weight of history. She held a defensive position for 11 hours under the continuous enemy fire with a collapsed lung, killed 19 enemy combatants, saved 14 American lives. Madison Fitzgerald had tears streaming down her face. "I knew it," she whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. "God, I knew she was something." Corporal Aidan Murphy, the young trainee Elena had helped that morning, was openly weeping. His hands shook, but not from fear this time, from overwhelming emotion, from the sudden understanding of who had helped him, who had seen his pain and recognized it. "She knew about my PTSD," he managed through tears. "She understood because she lived it." "The only reason you haven't heard her name," Pierce's voice cut through the gathering crowd, "is because everything about that operation is classified above your clearance level, above my clearance level. Senior Chief Blackwell is a ghost, an asset whose very existence is compartmentalized beyond normal channels." Gunnery Sergeant Connor Dalton snapped to attention and rendered a parade ground perfect salute. "Senior Chief?" His voice carried across the yard, and one by one every soldier in sight followed suit. Trainees, instructors, officers, support staff. They rose to their feet and saluted the small woman standing alone by the workbench, her torn shirt exposing the symbol of her silent sacrifice. Captain Hugo Burnett stepped forward, his face gray with shame. The training officer who had dismissed her with a glance now stood at rigid attention, saluting with a precision that suggested desperation. "Senior Chief, I owe you an apology." His voice cracked, the professional veneer shattering. "I failed in my duty as an officer. I prioritized convenience over justice. There is no excuse." Elena returned the salute with military precision. Her face still revealed nothing, but Isaac thought he saw something flicker in her eyes. Not satisfaction, not vindication, something softer, something that looked like relief. "There's no need for apologies, Captain," she said quietly. "But there is need for change." Barnett nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes, Senior Chief, there is." Caleb Morrison fell to his knees in the sand. His face had gone from red to white to a sickly gray. "I challenged a SEAL to a disassembly competition," he said to no one in particular. His voice held the hollow quality of someone in shock. "I challenged a SEAL. I am the stupidest person alive." Sarah Bradshaw had vanished, presumably fleeing to her office to begin damage control on a career that was already over. Her personnel file inquiry, her poisonous whispers, her systematic sabotage, all of it now recorded against her name. All of it now evidence of her failure to recognize excellence when it stood before her. Logan Hart was sitting in the sand where he'd fallen, rocking slightly, his face blank with shock. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. "I didn't know. I swear to God I didn't know." Tears began streaming down his face. "I called her. I said she should stay in the kitchen. I pushed her. I laughed when—" He couldn't finish. And Derek Vaughn. Derek stood where he had been standing when he'd grabbed Elena's shirt. He hadn't moved, hadn't spoken. His hand was still extended, frozen in the moment of his final mistake. His face had gone the color of old ash, and his eyes held the 1,000-yard stare of someone whose entire world had just collapsed. Pierce approached him slowly, deliberately, each step measured and final. "Staff Sergeant Vaughn." The colonel's voice was soft, but it carried. Everyone heard. Everyone would remember. "You just assaulted a decorated Special Operations veteran, a Bronze Star recipient, a Purple Heart holder 3 times over." Derek's mouth moved, but no sound came out. His hand began to tremble. "You questioned her competence, her knowledge, her right to be here." Marta. Pierce stepped closer until he was inches from Derek's face. You had the audacity, the sheer arrogance to tell a woman who has killed more enemy combatants than you've ever seen in photographs to stay in her lane. A sound escaped Derek's throat. It might have been a whimper. It might have been the last gasp of a dying pride. Consider your career over. Pierce turned away, the gesture itself a form of dismissal. MPs, please escort Staff Sergeant Vaughn to the detention facility pending court-martial proceedings. Two military police officers materialized from the crowd, their faces carefully neutral as they took positions on either side of the stunned ranger. Derek's legs seemed to fail him, and the MPs had to support most of his weight as they led him away. His feet dragged in the sand, leaving twin trails behind him like the wake of something sinking. Logan was next. The young soldier was still sitting when the MPs approached. Private First Class Hart, you are under arrest for assault on a senior NCO and conspiracy to commit. I didn't know. The words tumbled out in a panicked rush. I didn't know who she was. I swear I didn't know. That, Elena said quietly, her voice cutting through Logan's panic with surgical precision, is precisely the problem. Everyone turned to look at her, the small woman with the torn shirt and the revealed tattoo and the eyes that had seen things most people couldn't imagine. You treated me the way you did because you thought I was nobody. She looked at Logan, then at the gathered soldiers. Her voice was calm, measured, but it carried to every corner of the silent yard. Because you thought I was beneath you. Your behavior was the problem. And it would have been just as wrong if I actually was just a maintenance technician. The words hung in the air like a verdict, like a judgment that couldn't be appealed. Respect shouldn't be conditional on someone's rank or status. Elena's gaze swept across the assembled personnel, meeting eyes holding them. Every person on this base, every technician, every cook, every clerk, they all volunteered to serve their country. They all deserve dignity. Madison Fitzgerald wiped her eyes and nodded, standing straighter. Understanding something fundamental about service, about respect, about what it meant to wear the uniform. Aidan Murphy straightened his shoulders, his hands steady for the first time all day. Fern Gallagher approached slowly, carefully, as if afraid sudden movement might shatter the moment. When she reached Elena, she didn't salute, didn't stand at attention. She just wrapped her arms around the smaller woman and held on. I knew, Fern whispered, her voice thick with emotion. God help me, I knew there was something special about you. Elena returned the embrace, and for the first time since the confrontation began, her composure cracked slightly. Not breaking, but bending, showing the human being beneath the warrior's mask. You were kind to me when you didn't have to be, Fern. That means more than you know. When they separated, Fern's eyes were bright with unshed tears. You could have put them in the hospital. Both of them. I saw how you held back. I held back because hurting them wouldn't have solved anything. Elena glanced toward the detention facility where Derek and Logan were being processed. Their careers are over. Their reputations are destroyed. That's punishment enough. It's more than they deserve. Maybe, Elena's voice dropped. But I didn't join the military to hurt people. I joined to protect them, even from themselves. Isaac approached next, his expression complicated. Respect mixed with something that looked like vindication. Senior Chief, I worked with SEALs during Desert Storm. I thought I'd seen everything they could do. Every operator's different, Master Sergeant. I know, but what you did in that pit, he shook his head. You weren't fighting them, you were teaching them. Every move you made was designed to control without injuring, to dominate without destroying. Elena shrugged slightly. They were idiots, not enemies. There's a difference. A surprised laugh escaped Isaac before he could stop it. Permission to speak freely, Senior Chief. Granted. You're exactly what this place needs, what the whole military needs. He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. Take the job Colonel Pierce is going to offer you. Teach the next generation what real strength looks like. Elena was quiet for a long moment, her eyes distant. I'll think about it, Master Sergeant. I promise. As the training day resumed around her, Elena returned to her workstation. The weapons still needed maintenance. The trainees still needed equipment. Her job, whatever name it carried in the personnel database, hadn't changed. But everything else had. The torn shirt hung awkwardly on her shoulder, the tattoo still visible to anyone who looked. She made no effort to cover it. The secret was out. The ghost had been revealed. 4 years of invisibility ended by a single moment of violence from a man who couldn't accept being wrong. Colonel Pierce found her there 2 hours later, working as if nothing had happened, as if her entire world hadn't just been turned inside out. "Senior Chief, my office, now." It wasn't a request. Elena set down her tools, wiped her hands on a rag, and followed him across the yard. Soldiers who'd ignored her for 4 years now stepped aside with respect. Trainees who'd never learned her name now knew exactly who she was. The transformation was complete, total, irreversible. Pierce's office was austere, functional, the space of a career soldier who valued efficiency over comfort. A secure phone sat on the desk, its light blinking red, insistent, demanding attention. "That phone has been ringing for the past 30 minutes, Pierce said, closing the door behind them. "The encryption is level 7. I've only seen that twice before in my career. Both times it concerned operations that officially don't exist." Elena looked at the phone, at the blinking light, at the colonel who was watching her with eyes that knew too much. "Answer it," Pierce said quietly. "I'll give you privacy." "Sir, whatever this is about, Senior Chief, thank you. For today, for everything." He moved toward the door, then paused. "The instructor position is still available, whenever you're ready." He left, closing the door with a soft click. Elena stared at the phone for a long moment. 4 years of silence. 4 years of being invisible, of being nobody, of trying to forget who she'd been and what she'd done. 4 years of peace, fragile and temporary, but peace nonetheless. The light blinked, red, insistent, demanding. She picked up the receiver. "This is Blackwell." "Phantom." The voice was female, heavily modulated, unrecognizable. But something in the cadence was familiar. Something that triggered memories she'd tried to bury. "Welcome back." "Who is this?" "A friend, an old colleague, it doesn't matter." A pause, carefully calculated. "We've been watching your progress, the Wounded Warrior program, the maintenance work, the incident today." Elena's grip tightened on the receiver. "You've been surveilling me. We've been waiting for you. There's a difference. I don't. We have a mission, Phantom, one that requires your specific skill set. I'm retired. Medical discharge." Elena's voice hardened. "Whatever you're selling, I'm not buying. Even if it concerns Hawk." The name hit her like a physical blow. For a moment she couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The office around her seemed to tilt, reality shifting on an axis that had suddenly lost its center. "Hawk is dead," she managed finally. The words came out rough, scraped raw by 4 years of grief. "KIA, Raqqa, I saw him fall." "You saw him fall. You assumed the worst. Everyone did." The voice softened slightly, almost gentle. "But he's alive, Phantom. We have confirmation as of 96 hours ago." Elena sank into Pierce's chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. "That's impossible. We have satellite imagery, signal intercepts, human intelligence from assets on the ground." A pause. "I can send you the file if you don't believe me." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because we're mounting a recovery operation, and we want you on the team." Elena closed her eyes. Garrett Sullivan, Hawk, her spotter, her teammate, her friend, the man who had covered her retreat in Raqqa, who had drawn fire while she evacuated wounded, who had fallen in a hail of bullets she had been unable to prevent, who she had carried in her heart like a stone for 4 years, a weight that never lessened, a guilt that never eased. When the word came out as a whisper, "Briefing is at 0500 tomorrow. We'll send transport." "I haven't agreed to anything." "You haven't disagreed either." The voice took on a hint of warmth. "The easy days are over, Phantom. But then again, when were they ever easy for people like us?" The line went dead. Elena sat motionless in the gathering darkness, the phone still pressed to her ear. Her mind was a battlefield of warring emotions. Grief, hope, fear, determination. 4 years of trying to be someone else, trying to forget, trying to heal. All of it crumbling in the space of a single phone call. Through the window she could see the training yard where everything had changed, where her secret had been exposed, her past revealed, her future rewritten. Somewhere down there, Fern was probably starting her evening shift. Madison was probably reviewing the day's training, Aiden was probably fighting his demons with the courage of a soldier who refused to surrender. And Derek Vaughn was probably sitting in a cell contemplating the ruins of his career, understanding perhaps for the first time that rank meant nothing without character. That strength without restraint was just brutality. That the woman he tried to break had been stronger than him all along. Elena reached into her pocket and pulled out the challenge coin Pierce had given her earlier. She hadn't mentioned it to anyone, hadn't really examined it in the chaos of the day. Now turning it over in her fingers, she noticed something for the first time. On the reverse side, almost hidden in the intricate design, was a name. Hawk. Pierce had known, maybe not everything, but enough. Enough to give her this coin. Enough to let her find her own way to this moment. Enough to trust that when the time came, she would make the right choice. Elena rose from the chair and walked to the window. Outside, the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky. The same stars she'd watched from a rooftop in Raqqa while her lung filled with blood, while her teammates evacuated, while Hawk held the line and then fell disappearing into smoke and chaos. 4 years ago, she had walked away from the life of a warrior, broken in body and spirit, carrying the weight of everyone she couldn't save, everyone she'd left behind. The guilt had nearly destroyed her. The grief had nearly won. Tonight she would become Phantom again, and this time she wouldn't leave anyone behind. The night air carried the distant sound of taps as Elena stepped out of Colonel Pierce's office. The mournful notes drifted across Fort Bragg like a ghost marking the end of another day in the endless rhythm of military life. But for her, something new was beginning. Something that felt like destiny catching up with choices she'd made 4 years ago. She walked slowly through the darkened base, her mind still reeling from the phone call. Hawk alive. 4 years of grief, of guilt, of wondering if she could have done something different. And now this, a resurrection wrapped in mystery and delivered by a voice she didn't recognize, but somehow knew was telling the truth. You could hear truth in certain silences, in the spaces between words where lies couldn't hide. The barracks were quiet as she passed windows dark except for the occasional blue glow of a phone screen. Somewhere a soldier was writing home. Somewhere else another was lying awake, haunted by memories of places most Americans would never know existed. She understood that haunting better than most, had lived with it for 4 years, had learned to carry it like a second skin. Her quarters were modest. A small room in the support staff building that she had chosen specifically for its anonymity. No one expected a SEAL to live among the maintenance workers and supply clerks. That had been the point. To disappear, to be invisible, to exist in a space where no one asked questions because no one cared enough to wonder. She sat on the edge of her bunk and pulled out the challenge coin again. The eagle gleamed dully in the dim light, and she traced the letters of Hawk's name with her fingertip. Garrett Sullivan, 30 years old when they had served together. Born in Montana, loved fly fishing and terrible puns. Could shoot the wings off a fly at 300 yards and somehow still burn toast every single time he tried to make breakfast. Human. Real. Not a ghost. Not a memory. Alive. She had watched him fall in Raqqa. Watched the bullets tear into him as he covered her retreat. Watched him disappear into the smoke and chaos as the building collapsed around them. And then she had spent 11 hours holding a position with a bullet in her lung, waiting for extraction, telling herself that his sacrifice had meaning, that it hadn't been for nothing. Now everything she thought she knew was crumbling like sand. A knock at her door pulled her from her thoughts. "Come in." Fern Gallagher entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee. The steam rose in the cool air, carrying the scent of something normal, something civilian, something that belonged to a life Elena had tried to build. "Figured you might need this." Elena accepted the cup with a grateful nod. The warmth felt good against her palms. Grounding. Real. "How did you know I was here? Where else would you be?" Fern settled into the room's only chair, her expression gentle but knowing. "The whole base is talking about what happened. You're a legend now." "I was trying to avoid that." "Yeah, well," Fern shrugged, a half smile crossing her face. "Plans change, They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the coffee warming their hands against the evening chill seeping through the walls. Outside, a vehicle passed. Footsteps echoed on concrete, the base settling into its nighttime rhythm. "Can I ask you something?" Fern finally said. "Go ahead." "Why maintenance of all the things you could have done after everything, all the places you could have gone? Why come here and clean weapons?" Elena considered the question. It was fair, deserved an honest answer. When I was in the hospital after Raqqa, I had a lot of time to think about what I'd done, what I'd lost, what it all meant. She paused, searching for the right words. I realized that I'd spent so long being extraordinary that I'd forgotten what it felt like to be ordinary, to just exist without the weight of life and death on my shoulders. And cleaning weapons gave you that. It gave me purpose without pressure, contribution without consequence. Elena smiled faintly, the expression carrying a weight of hard-won wisdom. Every weapon I maintained, every rifle I checked, I knew I was keeping someone safe. Not by pulling a trigger, but by making sure that when someone else needed to, they could. Fern nodded slowly, understanding dawning in her eyes. That's beautiful and incredibly sad. Most true things are. Another silence, deeper this time. The kind that exists between people who've seen enough of life to know that some things don't need saying. What happens now? Fern asked. Elena thought of the phone call, of Hawk, of the mission waiting at 0500. I don't know, but I think my time being invisible is over. Fern reached out and squeezed her hand, the gesture simple but profound. For what it's worth, I'm glad I got to know you, the real you, even if it was just for a day. It wasn't just a day, Fern. Elena met her eyes. You were kind to me for 4 years when you had no reason to be. That's not nothing. It's what anyone should do. But most people don't. Elena's voice was soft. That's what makes it matter. Fern blinked rapidly, fighting back tears. When she spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. If you ever need anything, anything at all, you know where to find me. I do. They embraced, two women from different worlds connected by a simple act of human kindness that transcended rank and role and expectation. And when Fern left, Elena felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time. Hope. Fragile and tentative, but hope nonetheless. The night deepened, but sleep refused to come. Elena lay on her bunk staring at the ceiling, her mind churning through possibilities and probabilities. If Hawk was really alive, where had he been for 4 years? Who had been holding him? Why hadn't any intelligence service detected his presence before now? The questions multiplied like bacteria in a petri dish, each one spawning 2 more. And the bigger question, the one that gnawed at her like a persistent wound, why? Why reach out to a medically discharged veteran working as a maintenance technician when there were active duty SEALs who could handle a rescue operation? Unless they couldn't. Unless there was something about this mission that required her specifically. Something that made her the only choice despite 4 years away from operational status. She sat up, decision crystallizing in her mind like ice forming on still water. Sleep could wait. Answers couldn't. Colonel Pierce was still in his office when she arrived. The light under his door and the shadow moving behind it told her he hadn't left since she'd taken the phone call. He opened the door before she could knock, as if he'd been waiting. As if he'd known she would come back. I was wondering when you'd return. He stepped aside to let her enter. Coffee? No thank you, sir. Then sit. Elena remained standing, her body carrying a tension that couldn't be contained by furniture. How long have you known about Hawk? Pierce was quiet for a moment, his weathered face unreadable in the office's dim light. I received the first intelligence report 96 hours ago, the same time they contacted you, apparently. And you didn't think to mention it. It wasn't my place. He sat heavily in his chair, suddenly looking every one of his 64 years. Lines around his eyes seemed deeper, the weight on his shoulders more visible. This operation is being run by people who don't answer to me, people who don't answer to anyone I know. My role was to maintain your cover until they were ready to activate you. My cover. The words tasted bitter. So the maintenance job, the Wounded Warrior program, all of it was arranged, not arranged, facilitated. Pierce leaned forward, his pale eyes meeting hers with unwavering intensity. You chose to come here, Senior Chief. You chose the anonymity. All I did was make sure no one looked too closely at the woman cleaning weapons in Building 7. Make sure certain inquiries went nowhere. Make sure your file stayed locked behind clearances that would stomp casual curiosity. Elena processed this information, filing it away for later examination. The challenge coin, Hawk's name on the back. How long have you been carrying that? Since Raqqa. His voice softened, carrying the weight of memory. I was the one who signed in the order sending your team into that compound. I was the one who read the after-action reports, the classified ones. When they told me Hawk's body was never recovered, I had a coin made, a memorial, something to carry until we knew for certain. And now we know. Now we know. Pierce met her eyes. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Elena didn't hesitate. The decision had been made the moment she heard Hawk's name. Made 4 years ago on a rooftop in Raqqa when she chose death over abandoning her team. I'm going to bring him home. Pierce nodded as if he had expected nothing less. The briefing is at 0500 in the secure facility off base. Transportation will pick you up at 0430. I'll be ready. She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her at the door. Senior Chief. Elena waited. Pierce rose from his chair, his posture straightening into something formal. Something that transcended the casual relationship they'd maintained for 4 years. Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever you face out there, I want you to know something. She turned to face him fully, giving him the respect of her complete attention. What you did in Raqqa, what you've done every day since the strength it takes to keep serving, even when the service breaks you. His voice cracked slightly, emotion leaking through decades of professional control. You are the finest warrior I have ever had the privilege of knowing, and I am honored to have played even a small part in your story. Elena felt tears prick at her eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. Thank you, sir. No. Pierce shook his head. Thank you. The next few hours passed in a blur of preparation. Elena retrieved her go-bag from the hidden compartment in her quarters, the one containing equipment that no maintenance technician should possess. Medical kit, emergency rations, false identification for 3 different countries, and wrapped in oiled cloth at the bottom, her personal sidearm. A modified Glock 19 that had accompanied her on every deployment, every mission, every operation where death was a possibility and survival was earned through skill and luck in equal measure. She hadn't touched it in 4 years, but as her fingers closed around the familiar grip, it felt like coming home, like greeting an old friend who asked no questions and demanded no explanations. Just existed ready, waiting for the moment when it would be needed again. At 0300, she slipped out of the support staff building and made her way across the base. The darkness was absolute, the kind of black that swallowed sound and light alike. But she navigated by memory and instinct, her feet finding the path without conscious thought. 4 years of walking these routes had burned them into her muscle memory as surely as weapons handling and close quarters combat. She wasn't surprised to find she wasn't alone. Master Sergeant Isaac Thornton materialized from the shadows near the motor pool, his approach so silent that anyone else would have missed it entirely. But Elena had spent too many years listening for footsteps that didn't want to be heard. She stopped waiting for him to close the distance. Senior Chief, his voice was low-pitched to carry no further than necessary. Little late for a stroll. I could say the same, Master Sergeant. I couldn't sleep. He fell into step beside her 2 veterans, walking through darkness that held no fear for people who'd seen real night in real war. Word is you're leaving. Word travels fast. Always does. He was quiet for a moment, the silence comfortable rather than awkward. I know I can't ask where you're going, but whatever it is, whoever you're going after, I want you to know something. What's that? I worked with a lot of special operators in my time. SEALs, Delta Rangers, you name it. I've seen bravery and skill and dedication at the highest levels. He stopped, turning to face her in the darkness. But I've never seen anyone handle what you handled today with the grace you showed. Not once. Elena wasn't sure how to respond. Praise made her uncomfortable in ways that combat never did. Most people, when they're attacked, they fight back. They hurt the people, hurting them. You had every right to put Vaughn and Hart in the hospital. Isaac's voice was fierce with conviction. Instead, you controlled them, protected them from themselves, showed them mercy they didn't deserve. They weren't enemies, Elena said quietly. They were just fools. And you showed them what a real warrior looks like. He extended his hand. Whatever happens next, wherever you go, come back safe. The Army needs people like you. These kids need to see what real strength looks like. She shook his hand, feeling the calluses of decades of service against her palm. Understanding passing between them without words, respect earned through actions rather than ranks. Take care of them while I'm gone, she said. Madison, Aiden, The ones who are still learning what this life means. You have my word. Isaac paused, then reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. Here, so you always find your way home. He pressed a tactical compass into her hand. Small military grade, the kind that had guided soldiers through jungles and deserts and mountains for generations. This got me through Desert Storm back in '91. Carried it on every operation. Never failed me once. Elena closed her fingers around it, feeling the weight of history, of survival, of trust, passed from one warrior to another. I'll bring it back. I know you will. They parted without further ceremony. Two warriors passing in the night, their paths crossing for a moment before diverging into different futures. Elena continued toward the designated pickup point, the compass warm in her pocket like a promise. 0430 arrived with the rumble of an engine. A black SUV with tinted windows pulled up to Elena's position, its headlights cutting through the pre-dawn darkness like search beams. The rear door opened from inside, a silent invitation. Elena climbed in without hesitation. The door closed behind her with the solid thunk of armored plating, and the vehicle accelerated into the night. The driver and the man in the passenger seat wore civilian clothes, but their bearing marked them as operators. The way they sat, the way they scanned the environment even while driving, the way they existed in constant readiness. Neither introduced themselves. Neither seemed inclined to small talk. Elena was fine with that. She had enough to think about without adding forced conversation to the mix. The secure facility turned out to be an unremarkable building on the outskirts of Fort Bragg. The kind of structure that blended so perfectly into its surroundings that most people drove past it without a second glance. Chain-link fence, concrete walls, a single guard station manned by soldiers who checked credentials with unusual thoroughness, their eyes lingering on faces, comparing them to photographs, verifying identity through multiple layers of security. Inside, the building transformed into something else entirely. State-of-the-art communications equipment lined the walls. Digital displays showed satellite imagery of terrain Elena recognized immediately. The Syria-Iraq border, her old hunting ground, the place where she'd left pieces of herself that could never be recovered. A woman stood at the center of the room, her back turned, studying a tactical display with the focused intensity of someone planning an operation where failure meant death. She was tall, athletic, with close-cropped gray hair and the posture of someone accustomed to command. When she turned, Elena saw eyes that had seen too much, served too much, carried too much. Eyes that recognized the same in others. Phantom, the woman's voice carried authority without arrogance. Thank you for coming. You can call me Shepard. It's not my name, but it will do. Elena shook her hand, noting the strength in her grip, the scars on her knuckles that spoke of violence survived. You're the one who called. I am. Shepard gestured to the tactical display where the compound layout was rendered in precise detail. Let me introduce you to your team. Two men stood near the communication station. Both carried themselves with the controlled readiness of operators who'd spent years in the dark places of the world. Both had eyes that tracked movement with the unconscious precision of predators assessing threats. This is Ghost, a man in his late 30s with a Scottish surname that suggested Highland ancestry. Former Delta, explosive specialist. If it needs to blow up, he's your man. Ghost nodded, his pale eyes assessing Elena with professional interest. Heard about you, Phantom. Desert Storm guys still tell stories. Don't believe everything you hear, Elena said. Wouldn't dream of it. A ghost of a smile crossed his weathered face. And this is Wraith, a man in his mid-30s with an Irish surname. Former DevGru, communications and infiltration specialist. Doors that don't want to open tend to change their minds around him. Wraith extended his hand and Elena noted the way he moved. Economical, precise. The mark of someone who'd learned that wasted motion could mean death. Senior Chief, honored to work with you. 4 operators for a rescue operation in hostile territory. Elena looked at Shepard. Small team, minimal footprint, maximum deniability. Shepard's expression was neutral, professional. This operation doesn't exist, Phantom. If something goes wrong, there's no cavalry coming. No extraction, no acknowledgement that we were ever there. Black Ops. Elena had run enough of them to know the drill. Plausible deniability. Need to know basis. Precisely. Why me? the question that had been gnawing at her since the phone call. Why not someone on active duty? Shepard was quiet for a moment, weighing how much to reveal. Because Hawk asked for you, specifically, by name. The words hit Elena like a physical blow, stealing her breath, making her heart skip a beat before resuming its rhythm with painful force. What? 6 months ago, our asset managed to make brief contact with the prisoner. Shepard pulled up a file on the display showing surveillance photos taken through a grimy window. Hawk's face thinner bearded, marked by captivity, but alive. Undeniably alive. She had approximately 90 seconds before guards returned. Hawk gave her a message to deliver. She paused, letting the moment build, letting Elena understand the weight of what came next. He said, "Tell Phantom, I'm still here. Tell her the easy days are over." Lena closed her eyes, fighting back tears that threatened to overwhelm her professional composure. The easy days are over. The same words from the phone call, the phrase they'd used during training, during deployments, during the moments when things got hard and staying easy, would have meant death. A code between warriors who understood that survival sometimes required becoming something harder than the circumstances trying to kill you. "He knew we'd come for him," she whispered. "He knew you'd come for him," Shepard corrected gently. "You were his teammate, his friend. He held on to hope because he believed in you." Lena opened her eyes, and when she spoke, her voice was steady as steel, clear as purpose. "Brief me on the compound, layout, guard rotations, entry and exit points. I want to know everything." Shepard smiled, the expression transforming her severe features into something almost warm. "Welcome back, Phantom." The briefing lasted 2 hours. Elena absorbed every detail with the focus of an operator preparing for combat. Guard schedules down to the minute. Patrol patterns memorized with the precision of someone whose life would depend on being exactly where she needed to be, exactly when she needed to be there. Structural weaknesses identified and cataloged. Emergency protocols understood and planned for. By the time Shepard finished, Elena had memorized the compound layout as thoroughly as she knew her own quarters. Could close her eyes and walk through it in her mind, visualizing every turn, every door, every window, every angle that could conceal a threat or provide an opportunity. The plan was simple. All good plans were simple. Complexity was the enemy of execution, and execution was everything. Insert via modified helicopter at remote landing zone 12 kilometers from the target. Approach on foot under cover of darkness, using terrain to mask their movement. Breach the compound at 0200 local time when the guard rotation left a 90-second window of vulnerability. Extract Hawk. Exfil to the pickup point before dawn brought visibility that would make concealment impossible. Simple. Clean. 1,000 things that could go wrong hidden beneath the apparent simplicity. "Any questions?" Shepard asked. Elena had dozens, but only one that mattered. "When do we leave?" "Transport departs at 1800 tonight. You'll have approximately 12 hours to rest and prepare." Shepard's voice brooked no argument. "I strongly suggest you use that time to sleep. You're no good to anyone exhausted." Elena wanted to argue, wanted to dive into mission planning, immediately wanted to do something other than wait. But she recognized the wisdom in the order. Fatigue killed operators as surely as bullets. She'd seen it happen too many times to ignore the danger. "There are quarters in the East Wing," Shepard continued. "Shower, sleep, eat. Your gear will be ready when you wake." "And Phantom." Elena paused at the door. "I'm glad you're on this mission. Hawk couldn't ask for a better guardian angel." "I failed him once," Elena said quietly. "I won't fail him again." She found the quarters sparse and functional. Military efficiency stripped of comfort or personality. A bunk, a locker, a small bathroom with water pressure that felt like luxury after 4 years of base housing. She showered, washing away the residue of her old life, preparing herself mentally for what came next. Sleep came faster than she expected, pulled under by exhaustion and the strange peace of having purpose again. She dreamed of Raqqa, of the compound, of fire and smoke, and the endless hours of holding position while her lungs slowly filled with blood. Of Hawk's voice on the radio, steady even as the building collapsed around him. Of promises made and broken, and the weight of survival when others didn't. She woke at 16:30, her internal clock more reliable than any alarm. 2 hours to prepare. 2 hours to transform from Elena Blackwell, maintenance technician, into Phantom SEAL operator warrior. She dressed in the tactical gear that had been laid out for her: black fatigues, body armor, load-bearing vest with ammunition, medical supplies, communications equipment. Each item examined, verified, secured with the methodical precision of someone whose life depended on equipment functioning exactly as expected. Her modified Glock went into its holster, riding on her thigh, where muscle memory would find it without conscious thought. Extra magazines distributed according to a pattern she developed over 9 deployments, balanced for weight and accessibility. Combat knife secured at her back, angled for a cross draw that would clear the sheath in under half a second. When she emerged from the quarters, Ghost and Wraith were waiting. Both had undergone similar transformations, civilians becoming warriors through the ritual of equipment and purpose. They nodded in greeting, the silent acknowledgement of operators who understood that words were unnecessary when actions would speak louder. Shepard met them in the briefing room. "Final checks complete. Transport is on the pad. Any last words?" Elena looked at her team. These strangers who would trust her with their lives in the hours ahead, who would follow her into hostile territory based on nothing more than reputation and professional respect. Just one thing. Ghost and Wraith turned their full attention to her, waiting. "Whatever happens out there, whatever we face, we don't leave anyone behind. Not again. Not ever." The two operators exchanged a glance, something passing between them that Elena couldn't quite read. Then they nodded in unison, the gesture carrying the weight of oath. "Outstanding," Ghost said, his Scottish burr more pronounced with emotion. "Hoo-yah," Wraith added, the SEAL battle cry carrying all the meaning words couldn't express. The helicopter was a modified Black Hawk, stripped of identifying markings and equipped with noise suppression technology that made it nearly silent at altitude. As Elena climbed aboard, she felt a familiar sensation settle over her. The calm before the storm. The quiet that came when all preparation was complete and only action remained. She found a seat and strapped in as the rotors began to spin. Through the open door, she could see Fort Bragg shrinking in the distance. The base where she had hidden for 4 years, becoming smaller with each passing second. Somewhere down there, Fern was probably starting her shift. Madison was probably training. Aiden was probably fighting his demons with the courage of a soldier who refused to surrender. And Derek Vaughn was probably sitting in a cell contemplating the ruins of his career. Understanding, perhaps, that the woman he'd tried to break had been stronger than him all along. That strength wasn't about size or aggression. It was about control, about choosing when to act and when to hold back, about protecting even those who didn't deserve protection. She thought of them all as the helicopter climbed into the darkening sky, the people she was leaving behind, the person she was going to save, the warrior she was becoming again. The flight took 6 hours. Elena spent most of it in silence, reviewing the mission parameters one last time, visualizing the compound, running through contingencies, preparing her mind for what lay ahead. Ghost and Wraith did the same, each lost in their own pre-combat rituals, each drawing on years of experience to achieve the mental state where fear became focus and doubt became determination. When the pilot announced their approach to the landing zone, Elena felt her pulse quicken. Not from fear, from anticipation. This was what she had been made for, what she had trained her entire adult life to do: save lives, bring people home, make the impossible possible through skill and determination and the willingness to pay whatever price success demanded. The helicopter touched down in a dry riverbed, the rotors kicking up clouds of dust that obscured everything beyond arm's reach. Elena was out the door before the skids fully settled, her boots hitting the ground with a familiar crunch of Middle Eastern sand, a sound she'd heard in her dreams for 4 years, a sound that meant danger and purpose in the thin line between life and death. Ghost and Wraith flanked her weapons, ready eyes scanning the darkness. Professional, efficient, warriors doing what warriors did. "Clear," Ghost reported, his voice barely above a whisper. "Move out." Elena took point, leading them away from the landing zone and into the night. 12 kilometers of hostile territory lay between them and Hawk. 12 kilometers of uncertain ground, potential ambushes, unknown variables. She had faced worse. They had faced worse. Together they would face this. They moved in tactical formation, 3 shadows flowing across the desert like water seeking the lowest ground. No lights. No sound beyond the soft crunch of boots on sand and the measured breathing of operators conserving energy for what lay ahead. The moon rose and set. Stars wheeled overhead in patterns Elena remembered from 100 deployments, from 1,000 nights spent in places where civilization was a memory and survival was the only currency that mattered. Hours passed. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions, featureless except for the occasional rock formation or dry wadi. Elena's legs burned with exertion, her injured lung protesting the sustained effort. But she pushed through the pain, drawing on reserves built through years of training and hardened through years of combat. Pain was temporary. Failure was permanent. And she had no intention of failing Hawk again. Finally, they reached the compound, smaller than she had expected from the satellite imagery. A cluster of buildings surrounded by a makeshift wall, guard towers at each corner. Spotlights sweeping the perimeter in predictable patterns, the kind of security that assumed competence from defenders and incompetence from attackers. They would learn differently. Elena raised her binoculars, scanning the buildings until she found what she was looking for. A window on the second floor of the main structure. And behind the glass, barely visible in the dim light, a figure sitting motionless, waiting, hoping, believing that someone would come. "Target confirmed," she whispered into her radio, her voice carrying no further than necessary. Ghost and Wraith took up positions on either side of her, their weapons trained on the guard towers ready to provide covering fire if the infiltration went wrong. The guards rotated exactly as the intelligence had predicted. For 90 precious seconds, the north wall was unwatched. A vulnerability born of routine and complacency. A window of opportunity that would close faster than most people could react. But they weren't most people. "Go." They moved. The wall was over in 3 seconds, each operative boosting the next with practiced efficiency born of countless hours of training. Inside the compound, they split according to the plan. Ghost and Wraith peeling off to handle the guard posts while Elena made for the main building. She reached the door, her lockpicks appearing in her hands as if by magic. 4 seconds later, the lock clicked open. Not a record, but well within acceptable parameters. She slipped inside the darkness, swallowing her like a welcoming embrace. The hallway was exactly as described. Dark, silent, smelling of dust and neglect and the particular odor of places where hope went to die. She moved through it like a ghost clearing corners, by instinct, checking doors with touches so light they barely registered, contact ascending the stairs to the second floor, with steps that made no sound at all. The room was at the end of the hall, a simple wooden door with a heavy padlock that spoke of prisoners and captivity and the cruelty of cages. Elena pulled out her picks and went to work, her fingers moving with the precision of a surgeon, feeling the mechanism through the metal, understanding its secrets, convincing it to surrender. The lock clicked open. She pushed the door inward, and there he was, Garrett Sullivan. Hawk, 4 years older, 30 pounds lighter, eyes that had seen too much darkness, survived too much pain, but alive, breathing, real. Phantom, his voice was a ragged whisper rough from disuse and emotion. "I knew you'd come." She crossed the room in 3 strides and knelt beside him, her hands already working on the chains that bound him to the wall. Professional, efficient, but her eyes told a different story, told of 4 years of grief finally lifting, of guilt finally finding absolution, of a promise finally kept. "We're getting you out of here." The chains fell away and Hawk slumped forward. Elena caught him supporting his weight with an arm around his waist. "Can you walk? I can try." "That's all I ask." She keyed her radio. "Ghost Wraith, package secured, beginning extraction." "Copy that, Phantom. We're clear on our end. Move to exfil point." They made it down the stairs, through the hallway, out the door. The compound was quiet, the guards neutralized, the way clear. Almost too easy. Elena felt the hairs on the back of her neck rise. Something was wrong. She'd spent too many years in combat zones not to trust that instinct, that primitive warning system that operated below conscious thought and had kept her alive when logic said she should be dead. "Move faster," she urged, increasing their pace. "Something doesn't feel right." They were halfway to the wall when the lights came on. Spotlights blazed to life, turning night into day with brutal suddenness. Sirens wailed the sound, tearing through the silence like screams. And from every building, armed men poured into the compound, weapons, raised movements, coordinated responses too quick to be random. "Contact," Ghost's voice crackled over the radio. "Multiple hostiles all directions." It was a trap. They'd known. Somehow impossibly they'd known. Elena's mind raced through options, calculating angles, assessing threats. They were outnumbered, outgunned, caught in the open with a wounded man who could barely walk. Every tactical advantage belonged to the enemy, but she'd faced impossible odds before, had survived them through skill and determination and the willingness to make sacrifices others wouldn't consider. Wraith cover fire. Ghost get to the extraction point and call in the bird. She pulled Hawk toward the nearest cover, a concrete barrier that would provide protection for maybe 30 seconds. I'll hold them here. Phantom negative. Ghost started to protest. That's an order. She pushed Hawk toward Ghost, meeting her teammates' eyes across the chaos, understanding passing between them without words. Get him out, whatever it takes. Their eyes met, and in that moment, a lifetime of unspoken words passed between them. 4 years of grief, 4 years of guilt, 4 years of carrying the weight of his sacrifice. All of it culminating in this moment where she could finally balance the scales. Don't die, Hawk whispered, his voice breaking. Not planning on it. She turned toward the advancing enemy, raised her weapon, and became the warrior Kriti had always been. Phantom rising from the ashes one more time, ready for death if that's what it took, but determined to take as many of them with her as possible. Determined to give her team the time they needed. Determined finally to bring Hawk home. The firefight lasted 7 minutes. 7 minutes that felt like hours. 7 minutes of controlled bursts and tactical retreats, of drawing fire away from her team and buying them time to reach the wall. 7 minutes of being exactly who she was trained to be. A warrior, a guardian, a shield between the innocent and the predators who would harm them. But as she fell back, Elena noticed something wrong. The enemy's communications, she could hear them through her earpiece. Ghost had patched their frequency. They weren't speaking Arabic. They were speaking English. American English. Target acquired. Phantom protocol confirmed. Notify oversight. Ice flooded her veins. This wasn't a foreign militia. This was an American operation. Black site, rendition team. Someone in the intelligence community wanted her captured, wanted to bury Phantom protocol, and they'd used Hawk as bait. She keyed her radio. Ghost Wraith, this is a U.S. Black Op. Alternate extraction. Charlie, now. The mission had never been about rescuing Hawk. It had been about eliminating the ghost who knew too much. Phantom, we can't. You can and you will. That's an order. She didn't wait for acknowledgement. Just ran toward the primary landing zone, away from Hawk, away from her team, drawing the enemy with her like a magnet, pulling iron filings, using herself as bait to save the people she'd come to rescue. It was Raqqa all over again. Choosing death so others could live. Accepting the sacrifice because that's what warriors did. What guardians did. What she had always done when the choice was between her life and the lives of those she was sworn to protect. Behind her, the enemy followed. All of them, committing their entire force to capturing the prize she represented, and in doing so, leaving Ghost and Wraith free to extract Hawk through the alternate route. The 7 minutes became 10, became 15. Elena ran with bullets stitching the ground behind her, with her shoulder burning from a graze that wasn't serious but hurt like fire, with her ammunition running dangerously low and her options narrowing with every passing second. She was down to her last magazine when she heard it. The sound of rotor blades cutting through the night air. A helicopter, but not at the primary landing zone where the enemy expected. At alternate extraction point, Charlie, exactly where she'd ordered her team to go. A voice crackled over her radio. Female, familiar from the phone call, but different now, carrying the stress of combat operations. Phantom, this is Shepard. Move your ass, Senior Chief. Shepard was flying the helicopter herself. The mysterious voice from the phone call was here in the field, putting herself at risk to extract the team. Elena felt a surge of hope, stronger than exhaustion, stronger than pain. She changed direction, sprinting toward the alternate LZ with everything she had left. The enemy, realizing they'd been deceived, tried to cut her off. But they were too slow, too late, too committed to the wrong position. Elena vaulted the compound wall, her muscles screaming in protest. Across open ground, bullets kicking up sand around her feet. The helicopter materialized from the darkness as air guns laying down suppressive fire that turned pursuit into suicide. Ghost's hand reached down from the open door. "Come on, Phantom!" She grabbed his wrist, felt his strength haul her aboard as her feet left the ground. The helicopter banked hard, climbing into the night sky with the compound erupting in chaos below. Enemy forces firing uselessly at a target already beyond their reach. Elena collapsed against the bulkhead, breathing hard blood seeping from a dozen minor wounds. But she was alive. And beside her, strapped into a seat with Wraith monitoring his vitals, Hawk was alive too. "You're insane." Hawk's voice was weak but tinged with wonder. "You know that, right?" Elena laughed, the sound surprising even herself. 4 years of grief releasing in a moment of pure, unexpected joy. "Welcome back, Hawk. Welcome back yourself." He reached out and she took his hand, feeling the warmth of life in his grip, the proof that some promises could be kept, that some sins could be forgiven, that sometimes against all odds the dead came home. As the helicopter carried them towards safety, toward home, Elena allowed herself to feel something she had denied for 4 years. Peace. The past was behind her. The future was uncertain. But in this moment, flying through the darkness with the man she'd thought lost forever, she was exactly where she was meant to be. A warrior, a protector, a friend. The easy days were over. But the easy days had never been the point. Dawn was breaking over Fort Bragg when the helicopter touched down. Medics rushed to take Hawk, their urgent voices fading as they wheeled him toward the hospital. Lena watched him go, exhaustion finally catching up with her. She had burns on her arms, a gash on her shoulder, bruises covering half her body, but she was smiling. Colonel Pierce met her on the tarmac, his face a mixture of relief and something deeper. Pride, perhaps, or recognition of a debt paid that could never truly be repaid. "Welcome home, Senior Chief." "Good to be home, sir. The doctors say Sullivan will make a full recovery." Pierce's voice carried the weight of 4 years of waiting. "Thanks to you." Elena shook her head. "Thanks to all of us. I just finished what the team started 4 years ago." Pierce studied her for a long moment. "The instructor position is still available, whenever you're ready." She looked across the base, at the training yards where everything had changed just yesterday, at the buildings full of soldiers who had watched her secret revealed, at the sky brightening with the promise of a new day. "I think I'm ready now, sir." Pierce smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him in 4 years. "Then let's get started." As they walked together toward the command building, Elena felt the weight of her past beginning to lift. The ghosts she had carried were still there, would always be there, but they no longer defined her. She was Senior Chief Elena Blackwell, Phantom, warrior, teacher, guardian, and she had finally come home. 3 weeks after the mission, Elena visited Hawk in the medical facility. He sat up in bed, color returning to his face, 30 pounds still to gain, but alive in ways that mattered beyond flesh. "They're calling it the Blackwell Protocol now," he said when she entered. "New instructor program. Heard you're running it. Heard you're joining the cadre." She pulled up a chair. "Once you clear medical. Phantom and Hawk, teaching the next generation." His smile carried weight. "We always said if we survived, we'd pay it forward." "We survived." Elena's voice was quiet. "Not everyone did." "No." Hawk reached out, squeezed her hand. "But we're here, and we get to make sure their sacrifice meant something." Through the window, Fort Bragg stretched under morning sun. Somewhere, Derek Vaughn processed discharge papers, his military career reduced to cautionary tale. Sarah Bradshaw had resigned before court-martial, her name a whisper of what not to become. Logan Hart served confinement, learning lessons that should have been taught through leadership, not punishment. "The easy days are over," Hawk said, echoing their old code. "They never were," Elena replied, "but the real work, that's just beginning." 6 months later, Elena stood before her first instructor class. 24 students, 8 female and 16 male, arranged in neat rows. Madison Fitzgerald was among them, her red hair gleaming in the morning sun. Aidan Murphy was there too, serving as a guest instructor for PTSD awareness, his hands steady, his voice strong. And beside Elena, serving as deputy training commander, was Isaac Thornton, the man who had recognized her when no one else could, who had offered wisdom when she needed it most, who represented the bridge between generations of warriors. "I'm not here to teach you how to kill," Elena began, her voice carrying across the training yard. "The military has plenty of people who can do that. I'm here to teach you when not to kill, when to hold back, when to protect, when to choose death over dishonor. The students listened with an attention that went beyond duty. They knew her story now, knew what she'd done, knew what she'd sacrificed. They listened because she'd earned the right to be heard through actions rather than words. Real strength isn't about what you can do to others. It's about what you can do for them. Madison nodded, understanding dawning in her eyes. Aiden straightened his shoulders. Across the yard, new trainees who'd never met Derek Vaughn learned from his mistakes without knowing his name. And somewhere in a civilian warehouse, Derek himself probably saw the news. Saw Elena's promotion to Master Chief. Saw the official recognition of excellence he'd tried to destroy. He probably turned off the TV and went back to his diminished life, carrying the weight of choices that couldn't be unmade. But Elena didn't think about him anymore. Didn't waste energy on people who'd proven themselves unworthy of it. She focused instead on the future, on the warrior she was shaping, on the legacy she was building one lesson at a time. At the end of the day, as the sun set over Fort Bragg, Isaac found her on the range. They stood in comfortable silence, two veterans who understood that some things didn't need saying. "You know what I learned during Desert Storm?" Isaac finally spoke. "Old warriors don't retire. We just find new battles to fight." "And new warriors to train," Elena added. Isaac reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. His seal trident pin from 30 years ago, tarnished with age but still recognizable. Still carrying the weight of everything it represented. "Keep this for me," he said, pressing it into her hand, "until the day you pass it to someone who deserves it." Elena closed her fingers around it, feeling the weight of legacy, the weight of honor, the weight of responsibility that came with carrying the traditions of those who'd gone before. "I will," she promised. They stood together as darkness fell, watching the next generation of soldiers complete their training. And Elena knew with absolute certainty that this was where she was meant to be. Not in the shadows, not invisible, but here in the light, shaping warriors who would carry forward the values that mattered. Honor, duty, sacrifice, restraint. The easy days were over, the real work had just begun, and this time she wasn't fighting alone.